Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Colleagues at the back, can I please have your attention? There you go. Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our community dialogue and book launch, and what is basically the first one for the year after a bit of a short break with our partnership with the Herald as CANRAD. My name is Pampallis, and I'll be facilitating today's conversation on the Unresolved National Question and other intersecting issues of race and gender, identity, if you like, issues of exclusion as well. All right, so just to keep time and to make sure that we don't go over time, I'm just going to kickstart right into the program. Just to do an official opening, I'd like to call the Deputy Vice Chancellor of Research and Engagement, Professor Andrew Leach. Here.
Good evening to you all. Good evening. It's really good to be here this evening, Edwin. Good to see you. Students, who are the students who are with us? That's great. Yeah, absolutely. We salute you for coming out. And then for those who've travelled from out of town, I know our two co-editors from Wits, a number have come through from Grahamstown, East London. You're all very welcome. I'm Andrew Leach. I'm Deputy Vice Chancellor for Research and Engagement, and you haven't come to listen to me, so I'm going to just be brief. Let me say my head is swimming because I've rushed out of a meeting which is still carrying on upstairs. We started at 8 o'clock this morning. It must have been an important meeting. Yes, it is, because we are interviewing for our next Vice Chancellor. Our current Vice Chancellor's term comes to an end within the next few months, and I won't say who we were interviewing because they could have come from your universities. But it's a very important exercise that we choose the right Vice Chancellor to take the university to the next level or the next period of time. And I needed to just ask the chair of the committee that I be excused because of this function. So welcome to you all. You also haven't come to listen to a physicist. I looked through what the focus is. I know about the dialogues. I support it. It's part of my portfolio, being driven within research engagement by CANRAD. But my field is physics, and I'm not too sure if anyone's done chemistry. Some of you, absolutely. Ethel, good to see you. Chemistry, of course, tells us that the second law of thermodynamics, it's the law of entropy. And Stephen Hawking says it's one of the most fundamental natural laws in the universe. And I want to mention that law because I thought about it as I reflected on the documentation that was sent. It says that a body will continue to progress towards greater chaos. And of course it's written from a chemical point of view with regard to molecules, atoms, but it can also apply to macroscopic bodies, we would say in the sciences. A body, a tennis ball, a ping pong ball, a body, human body, or I think it could also apply to a nation. Unless we intervene and change things, it will be like the second law of thermodynamics, descending into a greater degree of chaos. And 23 years ago, we had the dawn of democracy, all the excitement, Bishop Tutu coining the term of the Rainbow Nation, and it just seems more elusive and more distant than now, 23 years later, than it was then. And it will take you and I, and everyone, in fact, to change this around. Because I think 2017 seems to be becoming very much a watershed year for the country. Barely a day or a week goes by without some new political intervention, etc. And so I just give you that background and that thought. I'm excited by what has been put down here, the Unresolved National Question. It's an academic book, and a university is a place for such dialogues and for the discourse. So we welcome it, we embrace it, and you have my full support that we can continue with this. And we do appreciate the support from the Herald as well in partnering with the university to have a launch of this nature. Not only partnership with the Herald and local communities, but also with sister universities. Rhodes University, just down the road. I would welcome and I would strongly support greater interaction with the neighboring universities, but of course we're a small country from a university perspective, and we all need to work together and mutually support each other. So I'm not going to say anything further except that you're all very welcome. Thank you for being here this evening. I think it makes a big difference for those who've labored over this book, because an academic work of this nature is a labor. It takes intense focusing, study, long hours, and I think it's great that our two co-editors are here, and most of the authors and co-authors of the chapter, or some of the co-authors of the chapters in the book. So welcome to you all, and enjoy the evening. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much, Prof. Leach. I just also think in addition to that, I'd just like to also just, in particular but not limited to, give a special welcome to some of our staff members, some of our student leaders who are here, also some leaders from the broader community who have honored us with their presence. Okay. Also, I just also want to note some chapter authors. So Mr. Basil Brown. Where's Basil sitting? Oh, there. Okay. So Mr. Basil Brown, can you please give me an applause? Here, here. Thank you. Mr. Malet Giosi in front. Mr. Hamilton Peterson also in front. And Mr. Alan Zinn, that everyone knows. Also, for chapter 11 in particular, Mr. Lucien van der Valk in front. All right. Thank you. Okay, so thanks for that. I'd like to now welcome our co-editors to join us and to basically open up today's discussion. Just a brief bio on our co-editors. I'll start with Mr. Edward Webster. Mr. Edward Webster is a research professor in the Society Work and Development Institute at the University of Witwatersrand. He is the author of 9 books and over 100 academic articles. He was a senior Fulbright scholar at the University of Wisconsin in Madison and the first Ella Butt professor at the International Center for the Development of Decent Work at Kassel University in Germany. He co-authored volume Grounding Globalization, Labor in the Age of Insecurity. He was awarded the American Sociological Association Award for the best scholarly monograph published on labor. In May 2017, he will be publishing an edited volume of Crossing the Divide, Precarious Work and the Future of Labor, locating the changing dynamics of work in a comparative context through research in India, Ghana, and South Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Edward Webster. So you can take my left.
Thank you.
All right, and introducing Ms. Karin Pampallis, who is a project manager at the Hidden Voices project located at the Society Work and Development Institute as well at Wits at the University of Witwatersrand. Aside from being co-editor of the Unresolved National Question, she has authored Nelson Mandela in the They Fought for Freedom series and co-edited Challenging Corporate Capital, Creating an Alternative to Neoliberalism. She worked for a number of years at the ANC's Solomon Mahlangu's Freedom College in Tanzania and has been a freelance editor since her return to South Africa. Ms. Karin Pampallis. And introducing our respondent today, Ms. Nwabisa from the Herald. She's the deputy editor of the Herald and the Weekend Post, newspapers respectively. She has been a journalist for 13 years. She has covered South African politics for over a decade and has vast experience in media management and political commentary. She was the news editor of Business Day in Johannesburg and was named the Mandela Bay Business Chamber Top 40 Under 40 Achiever. She is a passionate writer and publishes a weekly column called Another Thing, focusing on politics and current affairs. Ms. Nwabisa Mapungu. Yes. All right, with that being said, I'm going to hand over to you, Edward and Karin, and Ms. Nwabisa. Okay, thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity to share our ideas. Last night, we presented this collection of essays at a seminar at a university in Makana. I forget the name of the university. What is it again? Oh, yeah, that's right. What used to be called Rhodes University. And it was a wonderful crowd of students, undergraduate students as well. And two questions emerged from the discussion. The first was, why build a nation? Why are you bothered with building a nation in the age of globalization? And anyway, the nations you're talking about are the construction of colonialism. That was a very fundamental question. The second question was, does resolving the national question mean that one has to overthrow capitalism? Now, those two questions, those two fundamental questions, underlie this collection of research-based essays that we have put together. So, what is the national question? Why is it unresolved? And how could it be resolved? Those are the three questions that underlie our project. Let me begin with what is the national question? And I thought that the best way of introducing this to you is to quote from a man called Victor Wessels, who wrote in 1951 these words. He said, "Who constitutes the South African nation? The answer to this question is as simple as it would be in any other country. The nation consists of the people who were born in South Africa and who have no other country but South Africa as their motherland. They may have been born with a black skin or with a brown one, a yellow one or a white one. They may be long-headed or round-headed, straight-haired or curly-haired. They may have long noses or broad noses. They may speak Xhosa, they may speak Zulu, Sotho, English or Afrikaans, Hindu, Urdu or Swahili, Arabic or Jewish. They may be Christians, Mohammedans, Buddhists or any other faith. So long as they're born of a mother and belong to the human species, so long as they are not lunatics or incurable criminals, they all have an equal title to be citizens of South Africa, members of the nation, with the same rights, privileges and duties. In a nation, it is not necessary that the people forming it should have a common language or a common culture, common customs and traditions. There are many nations where the people speak different languages, consist of different nationalities with different cultures. All that is required for a people to be a nation is a community of interests, love of their country, and pride in being citizens of their country. Now, I thought that very simple, straightforward statement in 1951 by, at the time, a member of what was one of the political traditions we look at, the Unity Movement, really captures what I think the idea of the national question was about: building a common, prosperous, united nation. Why is the second question. Why has it not been resolved? And I think that gets closer to the complexity of the issue, because when we say it's not been resolved, I think what we're saying is that the issues that drove the struggle for democracy in South Africa, the demands, have not been fully met. So that's, and the question is then, why have we not achieved those goals? And there are many different answers, and what we try to do in the book is identify what those kinds of answers, or if you like, those traditions, those political traditions in South Africa have tried to answer. Now, for some, the answer why we do not have one prosperous, united nation is because of racism, the persistence of the domination of white over black. And of course, they tend to be drawn from a range of different political traditions. There are others who would argue that what's dividing us is ethnicity, or if you like, tribalism, people hanging on to their separate ethnic identities. There are others who would say the real division, the real obstacle to building a common nation lies in class, in the inequality between capital and labor, the deep and growing inequality. And then there are others who may say, actually, the real issue is the persistence of the domination of men over women, sexism, gender. And of course, there could be others who would say, really, the problem is that we have many languages, we have one language that tends to be dominant, and what we really need to do is decolonize and create a greater respect and potential for that multiplicity of languages that exist. Now, those are, if you like, different ways of trying to answer the question as to why it's an unresolved. We haven't met our goals. We haven't achieved this idea of one nation. Now, there's a third question. My first one is, what is the national question? The second is, why is it unresolved? The third one, which I suppose is the most interesting one, is how could we resolve the question? How could we actually build one common nation. Now, here is where the problem and the question becomes more interesting, because how you answer that question will depend on what you think the obstacle is for a common nation. If you think that the reason why we do not have a common nation is because we are not giving recognition to the different ethnic diversity, that we're not actually one nation, we're many different nations. Now, of course, that was apartheid. That was the idea behind Verwoerd's concept of the Bantustans. And we have a wonderful chapter here in the book by the leading sociologist of Afrikaner nationalism, Dunbar Moody, who shows how Afrikaners grappled with that question. And they grappled with the question is, how can we demand our freedom as Afrikaners and deny it to Africans? And of course their answer was, well, it's quite simple. The answer is, there's not one nation, there are many nations. There are many nations. isiXhosa. Now, they have their own nation, the Transkei, the Zulu, they have their own nation, and so on. That was a way of trying to resolve the national question by suggesting that what we are many different nations. Of course, we know that that was a flawed project. However, we do have two chapters there that look at Zuluness, because the idea of an independent state for Zulu speakers, of course, is what we still see today in KwaZulu-Natal. So that's a way of trying to resolve it, a flawed way. There are others, and in some ways this is really the core of the book, because the sort of dominant way in which people addressed the national question, and it goes back 100 years, was to argue that what you really needed in a country like South Africa and other colonies, economically backward countries, is to see it as a two-stage struggle. That first there is a struggle for national democracy, and then there's a struggle for socialism. And that tradition goes back to the Soviet Union, goes back to Lenin, and Lenin's notion of this struggle, this national democratic struggle. And that really has been the driving force in the Congress tradition, particularly the Communist Party of South Africa. But there is a third tradition, which we identify in the first part of the book, which I would call the Congress tradition. And the Congress tradition, if you were to try, and we have two chapters on that, really focusing around going back to the 40s, through to Luthuli, into Oliver Tambo. That's very much an argument for non-racialism, for building one nation, essentially de-racializing capitalism, making capitalism make more of a black face rather than a white face. But it's essentially an argument for de-racialization. And then, of course, we have a very powerful a tradition we also identify called the Africanist tradition, going back Pan-African Congress, maybe through into various variants today. And what's important about that tradition, or that way of trying to resolve the national question, is it sees racism as a global problem, as something that comes with colonialism, and something that has to be seen as a Pan-African project, not just as a South African project. So what I'm suggesting, what we try to do in the book then is to say that the way in which you would think about resolving the question will be shaped by what you think is the reason why it is unresolved. And there are different ways of answering that. But the last chapter, in a way, is the surprise. Because in spite of this struggle, this revolutionary struggle, what we end up in post-apartheid South Africa is a liberal constitutional democracy. Yeah. And the question we posed there is, can this national democratic tradition coexist with a liberal constitution? Or is this liberal constitution simply a compromise made as a stepping stone towards a state-led, let's call it authoritarian path? I mean, we don't answer that question, but I think it's the fundamental question, really, because it's not a traditional liberal constitution. It contains with it a Bill of Rights, of socio-economic rights, that gives you the right to water, the right to housing. Now, of course, you may argue that those rights are actually an obstacle to a transformation of the economy. And I think that's where we locate and suggest, by way of a conclusion, that by approaching this debate through the hidden voices of the past, this volume, this collection, will act as a catalyst in developing a new research agenda and a political project that takes the debate forward in the context of a democratic state in the 21st century. Such a project, we argue, should begin by revisiting the national question. Thank you.
Well, Eddie's given you an excellent introduction to the book that we're here to launch today. I want to briefly speak to two things. First, I want to describe the Hidden Voices series, which this book is a part of, the Hidden Voices project. And then I want to speak to one of the questions that Eddie began with, and that's one of the questions that we faced last night, is why bother? Why bother with the national question? Okay, so first, very briefly, the Hidden Voices project. It's a project that began a couple of years ago and is concerned with looking at left thought under apartheid, with knowledge production under apartheid, and ways in which it was often suppressed under that regime. So we, in our project, are looking at 3 different kinds of publications that are dealing with left thought, especially in those years. First, we're republishing things that were printed in small quantities at the time, but that have long been out of print or that that weren't successfully spread throughout the country. One of these is already out. It's an autobiography by a shop steward in the Dunlop tire factory, and it was first published by NUMSA in 1989. And it's called A Working Life, Cruel Beyond Belief. It's the biography of Alfred Temba Qabula. He was, as I said, a shop steward, and he was also a poet. And the book contains not only his life story, but a number of his poems. Some very powerful material there. And we're hoping also to follow this up with other ones. The next one we have in line is about a woman trade unionist in KZN, Jabulile Ndlovu, who worked at the Prestige homeware factory just outside of Pietermaritzburg. She was assassinated in 1989, and the book is about her life in the unions and also about how violence affected workers, particularly women workers in the 1980s during our struggle. So that's one category. The second category is looking at left thought that was so suppressed it never got published at all. We're looking there, for example, at a book about a grassroots working class person whose name is Arnold Selby. He worked with the textile workers in what was then the Transvaal and the Eastern Cape as well. He eventually joined the ANC and the South African Communist Party. He went into exile because he married a colored woman, which was just, not to be done, and also for his political work. And once he'd reached Ghana, where he spent the first years of his exile, he wrote about how he became politically active and active in the trade unions. And it's the story of a very ordinary person and why activism became important to him. And the third category in our Hidden Voices project is more contemporary writings, but writings that put forward a point of view that was not welcome in the apartheid years. And of course, the book that we're launching today is one of those books. We're looking at things that need to be discussed today. Okay. The last thing I want to say about our project is that we would welcome suggestions. We have our own ideas about what we'd like to see published, but if you know of a person or a manuscript or a train of thought that you think needs to be explored that would fit into the type of thing that I've described just now, we'd like to hear from you. Okay, moving on to the National Question book. So, as Eddie said, one of the questions that was raised by a young student at last night's launch was, well, why? The National Question was first discussed in the 1920s, even earlier than that. Now it's 2017. What relevance has it got? Why are we bothering with it? Personally, I think it's very important to look at something like the National Question. In exile and in South Africa during the struggle years, we were fighting for something. We had certain expectations of what a future South Africa would be like. Since 1994, we have accomplished a lot. We can all vote. There's a universal franchise, which wasn't the case under apartheid. In theory, everybody has economic opportunities now to better themselves and their families. There's been a lot of infrastructure development. Education is much more freely available than it was before, and so on and so on and so on. But a lot of people would argue that we haven't actually accomplished the kind of freedom that we were fighting for. There's still a long way to go. And our respondent last night, Maziboko Jaha, uttered a phrase which really resonated with me. He said, "We do not yet have a nation in the image of the majority in this country." And that's true. A lot of people are better off than they were under apartheid, but a lot of people are not. We still have a lot of work to do. South Africa today is very fragmented. we have a lot of problems. And, you know, especially in the last few months, you can't ignore the effect that some of those problems are having. It's like your deputy VC said, in some ways we're descending into chaos. And if we let it continue, we not only won't have a good future, but we'll be throwing away what we've achieved so far. So I think it's very important to address the issues that are facing the country and to solve those issues. And I think what we're aiming for, if we're going to achieve what we were fighting for in those years, what we're aiming for is a united nation where everybody has a good life. One of our chapters in here by Robbie van Niekerk at the university, whose name we may not mention, is about the good society. What is it? Why should we have it? It's the ANC position, basically, from those years. So it's important to fight for it. We have to deal with issues like race and class and gender and ethnicity. We can't let the chaos continue, because the end result of entropy is nothing. Everything has become nothing. That's not the kind of South Africa we want. We have to fight for the South Africa that we want to create. And I think that one of the ways to achieve that is by looking at a South African nation. Not the kind of nation that was based on ethnicity or a particular language or even a particular color. But what do we want in South Africa? We have to find the answers to those questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karin. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'm very honored to be here this evening. As the Herald, we are absolutely honored to continue again with this partnership. Thank you again, CANRAD and NMMU. We're particularly honored because it's an opportunity for us to tap into and provide a platform to have these kinds of conversations. Which is something that is obviously at the core of what we do and what we want to become. A couple of weeks ago when Alan and I met and he introduced this concept and he said, our first dialogue this year, let's have one, hosting the editors of the book, The National Question. I thought, oh gosh, Alan. It's again, and I thought to myself, should we have it? Yes, the dialogue itself, of course, we wanted to have, but I thought, should we have it? Are we going to have again those conversations that seem meaningless? And I read the book, and I kind of was taken aback. I think I was taken aback because it raises a lot of, it traces back. To a lot of fundamentals that got us to the place that we're actually at the moment. It's obviously a very good body of work, well-researched body of work, something which one must appreciate. But I think what it did for me, it helped me to understand, how did we actually get here? It helped me to understand, issues that we have not managed to move from. I'll talk about some of the issues, a bit later. This morning I was listening to the radio and they were talking about why South Africans don't watch their own movies on cinema, and it's quite embarrassing actually, and so I think they were talking particularly in reference to the movie, the story of Solomon Mahlangu, and the fact that it really is struggling, on cinema. And one person tweeted and said, something along the lines of, we're really tired, of talking politics. We're tired of we have fatigue, particularly with everything that happens in the country. And they said, it was men, by the way, and they said, I'd rather go watch movies about romance. And I thought to myself, it's interesting. Fair enough, you would want to watch movies about whatever. but I thought to myself, it's interesting that we come from very different vantage points, in the sense that, you know, I can never imagine somebody saying, I have politics fatigue in a country where we actually need to have conversations that not only shape and affect our lives at the moment, but will definitely shape, you know, the future. And I thought it's amazing, you know, for that there are people who think, you know, these things don't really affect us, when ultimately, even if something doesn't affect you right now, ultimately the mood in the country is moving to a direction where everyone will be affected in one way or the other. And I think the conversations that we've seen, and conversations that have come from spaces such as universities that talk about, again, you know, the national question, what kind of nation do we want to become, and where we're going, I think, you know, it as I say, it things that will affect every single one of us. There are three concepts that I'd like to tap into the book, which I believe are quite central for me, and perhaps very, you know, central to where we are at and where we want to go. The one is obviously the ideology of workerism. You know, the book talks about, you know, it defines what it is. It talks about how workerism was very much a misunderstood and misconstrued ideology. It talks about how it was seen as this concept of that is against non-racialism, and I think you guys argue in the book that it's, you know, it's actually not. What it does, if anything, it's saying that the whole nationalism is really not enough to actually change the lives of people. It falls short. It actually fails to ensure that workers have means, have ownership, and have means of production, which obviously has a lot of impact. What it did, I think, for me was, you know, it took me into the ANC and what one might call the policy stagnation in the ANC. I think, you know, it influences the internal clashes that we see, those that are about policy. I mean, there are other clashes obviously that exist, but those that are about policy. And I thought, for example, you know, in the ANC you've got you know, workers who will say, COSATU, for example, will say, you know, let's ban labor brokers. But capitalists in the ANC, you know, come out and they say absolutely not, because, you know, that would actually destroy our economy. If you're a worker, if you're part of COSATU, if you're part of the not the left, but the, you know, worker people in the ANC, you would say, but what economy are we talking about? You know, it's not an economy that we benefit from. It's an economy, if anything, that is built on black people breaking their backs to ensure that they keep up, you know, what the riches of capitalism. And what I think this book then does, for me, it raises the question about the voice of labor in South Africa. If it is so suppressed, where is it possible for it to find its meaningful expression? Where is it possible for it to find, you know, where it can actually be heard and it can actually influence policy as well as the implementation of policy? And I think that's one thing, if you guys could, to actually talk about that. We talk about how we have millions of workers in South Africa. These are people who vote. These are people who really form the face of this country. Yet these are people who are not listened to the most. These are people whose voice is the most suppressed. Why is that the case, and how is it that voice can actually be heard, and not just heard, but can actually influence the direction of this country? The second thing I'd like to talk about, or just pick on the book, is obviously the burning issue of land. It's the burning issue of land, and what is of interest to me is, you know, it obviously traces the history of dispossession in South Africa, you know, obviously to 1913 and beyond that. What I found very hurtful was the fact that, you know, I mean, the book talks about 1913 and then it talks about sort of 20 years after that, so run up at the 1930s. And it talks about the situation particularly for black people at the time, where, you know, we were bickering about, you know, we're having tribal arguments about whose land is it anyway, you know, which ancestors are more real than the other. It talked about the frustration, the anger, the just completely being dispossessed. And I think what did hurt me was, you know, to look back and you realize that in 2017, this is the very same conversation that we're still having. Why is that? And if it's such a burning, 2017 and what, 23 years has it been into our democracy, the kind of conversation that they were having in 1930 is the kind of conversation that we are having as a country now. Why is that so? Why is it that you know, everything that has been done, the laws that have been signed into place, the policies that have been implemented, why are we still finding ourselves in this position where the majority of people in this country are completely landless? A couple of weeks ago, or a month or so ago, as the Herald, we hosted the MEC of Agriculture. It's called now Agrarian Reform. It was an excellent conversation. One thing that hurt me in that conversation is that we were sitting and talking, and there was a young man, two actually, who were sitting in the audience, and they're from Port Elizabeth, and they live in Motherwell, I think, and they spoke passionately about how they want the lack of access to land, yes, to live on, you know, a place to call actually your own, but land to work. And they spoke about how they're studying agriculture and studying, you know, issues to do with land. And yet they were saying we can't work because we just don't have that kind of access. We live in Port Elizabeth. We don't want to go to live in the Transkei because actually it doesn't mean anything even that. But we live here. How come is it that we're encouraged to get into this kind of field, a field that we believe in, a field that we believe, you know, forms the backdrop of our economy, yet we are completely excluded from it? And it's those kinds of questions that I think, you know, what then happens, it forms a lot of the anger, obviously, you know, to not only just black people, but young people as well. And I think maybe the next part of what I want to pick on, which is the Constitution, might form some of or give some sort of indication on why we find ourselves in the position that we are in. The book speaks about our Constitution and what it means, you know, to different people, or at least how I interpreted it. Was really what it means to different people. And I realized that our Constitution is viewed very much in different light by the haves and the have-nots in South Africa. So for the haves in South Africa, our Constitution is the sacred sort of body of legislation that, you know, that protects our rights, protects human rights, but also if you have in South Africa, it protects your economic rights as well. And yet if you are a South African that is still dispossessed, you look at the Constitution as, yes, it does protect your human rights, as sure it should, but you feel that it protects, or rather it reinforces the abuse of your economic rights. So in other words, you know, when it comes to issues of, again, the whole land issue, when it comes to issues of property relations in South Africa, you know, the rights that people have for ownership, you find that, you know, it still, to a large degree, reinforces the current landscape that we've got. And I think the question that you raised about why are these things relevant, you know, for a lot of people, they're not just things to be spoken about. They are basically our very lived reality. And if we're not able to address them and address them adequately, we might find ourselves, as you're saying, you know, in a slippery slope, which will lead to a very, very dangerous place that one hopes we don't actually get to be in. Let's talk about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Edward, Karin, and Sis Nobisa. I just want to allow Lucian or Tatu MP just an opportunity, just about not more than 5 minutes, because I'd like the bulk of it to be, bulk of our time to be given to us having the engagement. So just to speak into the conversation. We'll start with Lucian.
Is this thing working? Okay. Thanks very much for raising the issue around workerism. I just wanted to maybe start with a short story and then I'll get into what the chapter about workerism was about. So it's been quite an interesting weekend. We had a situation where the president was booed at a COSATU Congress, at a COSATU May Day. It's the first time ever. Yet many of those who were booing him were supporting another guy who would also have cause, I think, for a lot of workers to be worried about, which is Cyril Ramaphosa. We have a situation where in August 2012, there was a massacre at Lonmin Mine, in which Cyril Ramaphosa owned shares. Now we have a situation where the labour movement is split in a choice between Jacob Zuma and Cyril Ramaphosa. Now this is exactly the situation that the workerist current wanted to avoid. The workerist current in the early 1980s, at a time when we tend to forget the African National Congress, the South African Communist Party were not the big dominant forces they were now. The workerist current, based in a large section of independent black unions, argued that the working class needed to go it alone, that the working class needed to fight for an emancipation and a liberation that was much deeper than simply electoral democracy, that the working class, organizing itself first through trade unions, then through a larger working class movement, should aim at a radical and massive redistribution of power and of wealth in society. What the workers argued was that a genuine emancipation for the majority of people, for the black working class in particular, but the larger working class in South Africa, required autonomous, independent, powerful shop floor-based unions that would be able to win at the point of production immediate gains, but that would then be able to project their power and their assistance to other sections of the working class, so from the factory to the township, to systematically build at the grassroots powerful, democratic, bottom-up, worker-controlled movements. And in this, rather than form an alliance between the working class and capitalists, rather than form an alliance between the working class and landed landowners, rather than form an alliance between the working class and political parties, the aim should rather be to unite the working class, the employed and the unemployed, unionized and the community-based, the youth and those who were working, their parents. And the aim here in trying to get this capacity was to build working class identity, working class culture, working class history, to fight for significant economic and political reforms, including within working class communities, but as a step, as a basis, as a method to accumulate the power and resources that the working class could use to push for further gains, not as the junior partner of a political party, but as an autonomous force, not in a popular front, which is a link, an alliance between different classes, but in a workers' front. This required, they argued, a movement separate from the nationalists, including the African National Congress, separate from the Marxist-Leninists, including the South African Communist Party, separate from the multi-class nationalist movements that they promoted. Their general argument was that after independence, the typical pattern is that the working class hoists new governments into power and then is hoisted by those new governments. Their argument was, they sent a study to Zimbabwe in 1983, that the working class makes the sacrifices. The working class can't go into exile. The working class stays and it fights and it struggles and it builds patiently. But others come and they take what the working class has built. And in 1983 in Zimbabwe, this is what happened. There was a massive strike wave by workers. The government at the time cracked down on it. Robert Mugabe put the unions under the direct control of the state and appointed his nephew, Albert Mugabe, as head of the unions. And unions paid their fees to the government, not to the unions. This is what they were looking at, so that's what they were worried about. The other key part of this, the stress on working class power, working class independence, and the expansion of workers' power across society in order to secure a radical, major redistribution of wealth and resources was a very key point, and this was the point that the full emancipation of the working class majority in South Africa, including and specifically the black working class majority in South Africa, required the abolition of capitalism. That while workers continue to be exploited and dispossessed, they would have freedom perhaps in the form of formal rights, in the form of an independent government, but they would not have real equality. Moses Mayakiso, who was a leading workerist in Mawu, he was elected first president of NUMSA while in jail on treason charges, argued, apartheid is just an appendage. It's a branch of something else, the tree of oppression, which is capitalism. If you chop the branch, the tree can still grow. You have to chop the stem straight once and for all. South Africa's economy is in an advanced stage, and the workers can take over and direct the whole thing. There are not two stages in the revolution. There's one stage, continuous. In other words, the achievement of workers' freedom from apartheid had to be and required the simultaneous destruction, pushing back the relations of capitalism. Now, to start to pull this together, the aim was to build a broad working class movement for working class power. In this sense, majority rule meant the rule of the working class. In this sense, the aim was not to create a new nation with different, which reproduced the exploitation dispossession of the past, but a new nation reconstituted by the working class. A new nation free of racism and the material divisions and the capitalist system that underpins it. A non-racial nation, but based on class unity. And within this process, to build, through immediate struggles and structures, elements of the future. That is to build tomorrow today. That is to use the immediate struggles to build the capacities for a new future, to build the democratic capacities for a new future. Now, just to pull this together and tie it back to what Eddie said, why would you want to create a nation? Well, one of the main arguments was you wanted to unite the working class. You wanted to unite it over the divisions that had been instituted under apartheid between rural and urban Africans, between colours and Africans, between Indians and Africans, between white workers and Africans. Now, obviously the core of this movement was a black movement, but it was one which envisaged its allies in working class terms and one which envisaged its project as part of a working class revolution. Secondly, how does this link to capitalism? Rather than go with the idea you can de-racialize capitalism, their argument was you could only de-racialize South Africa by abolishing capitalism. So, to close that there, I'm done. To close that there, the aim was to avoid exactly what we have now. The aim was to have a working class movement independent of the political parties, able to forge its own way, able to make consistent gains for working and poor people, able to push back the boundary of power and of wealth in society, and able to constitute itself as a power, a class preparing for power that would be able to secure its final emancipation. Thanks.
All right, thank you so much, Lucian. I think the one closest.
Apparently, there's. It's all right. I think I can talk and be audible. It's very rare that I've had to speak at a time when all my arguments have been marshaled by the speaker before me and represented to an audience. And now all I had to do is to chime in with what has been done. I suspect this comrade saw my notes. And therefore, he thought he'd go first. But I must thank you very much, Lucian, for the foundation that you've laid. I want to approach the same subject that you've done in a historical manner, in order to justify why we want to build a nation. I stand out here to speak and explain the views from tradition of the unity movement. Unfortunately, I won't be able to explain the unity movement itself, but it's enough that I've got to present the viewpoint. Now, colonialism, when it came to this land, did one basic thing thoroughly. It destroyed traditional societies which were here, got them scattered, got them atomized, and virtually made it impossible for them to exist. Now, in fact, it was so terrible and single-minded that it even went behind some of the hallowed sections of the people. We all know here the story of Nelson. That was an imperialist plot. That a poor lady like that was exploited for the purpose of destroying the whole Xhosa nation in 1857. Therefore, we are talking here about a system which went about systematically to destroy what we call now the oppressed people of this land, the indigenous population in this country. Now, what therefore could be the only response that will arise? That response came in the manner of a position advanced by the unity movement in the 1940s, when we said we want to build a nation. Our slogan is to go forward, building a new South African nation. Now, that nation, of course, would be meaningless if it was not a nation that would collect around itself all the riches of the nation, riches of the past in culture, music, and everything else, to ensure that we would reconstitute the future of this country around the idea that the poorest majority of these people, of the people here, are really the majority around whom the future must be built. Now, Lucien has spoken already about the various ways in which this could be done, this should be done. Now, I'll give you one way it should not be done. It was, of course, in my view, criminal. The fact that when trying to advance the building of this nation, the ANC could do no more than go back to 1951 and exhume the ghost of the Band Authorities Act, using it for the purpose of building the future around traditional authorities, around the chiefs, around all those crooks who have been used by Matanzima and Sebe and others to destroy this nation. Now, this is, of course, in the name of the Traditional Leadership and Governance Framework Act. That, I believe, is one of the most iniquitous ways in which anybody could contrive the idea of building the South African nation. Now, I do want to head towards conclusion with the view that when you build a nation, you go about putting together all the resources, material, economic, political, and organizational, which will bring about the prosperity of the nation. And one of the things you do is to help the nation to build self-defense units in the manner that they've done in Cuba, in the manner that they did in the Soviet Union. You cannot defend the nation purely from the center. It must be supported by political ramparts all around the periphery to ensure that no part of the society is exposed to the enemy. Now, I therefore want to conclude, comrades, by saying that perhaps the most supreme idea around which we push forward this idea is that it is only within the sanctuary of one united and mobilized fighting nation that we, the people, we, the workers, can build a new cornucopia for this land. A land of plenty that will ensure that there is milk for each baby every night, that there is food for each family, that we will be able to wake up every morning, go out to work in the fields and everywhere else, both in town and country, and ensure we are building a prosperous nation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'm going to. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I'm now going to open the first round of questions, comments, and then from there we'll see how much time we'll have. Hopefully, we'll have 2 rounds, and then we'll see how far the engagement goes from there. All right. So I'll take the first 5 or 6. All right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right.
Distinguished panel, program director, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for the opportunity. My take about on the discussion at hand is that currently here at home, South Africa, which you can never divorce South Africa to the entire African continent, is still suffering land dispossession by the West. Land dispossession that started in 1486, when the koi of our land were dispossessed, their God-given property, which is its land and their natural resources. Africa's misery is not a mistake. This is a man-made misery we find ourselves in. It was caused purely by the West when they invaded Africa, using all forms of ammunition, including the barrel of the gun, dispossessing our continent. Today, what the West has done, produced 3 most touching illnesses. The West brought hooliganism. They brought thuggery. They brought lawlessness. It is said, my grandmother said, Africa she was told by her grandmother that Africa, it is said, was one of the most peaceful places you could ever visit.
Yes.
Africans were at peace among themselves up until the event of 1486, when the Khoi were dispossessed by Portugal, followed by Dutch in 1652, followed thirdly by. Can you please allow me? Followed by Europe in 1799. For as long as the land issue is not thoroughly addressed to the satisfaction of the entire African continent, this country will still, in the next generation, in many more centuries, experience what we see today. It is said, being said that we are free, but our land, we are still landless. We are still colonialism has caused untold abnormality to Africa because of land dispossession. Their wealth, their marine resources that were meant to cater for our welfare. I'm rising because the land issue needs a thorough readdress. It will be said that we can die. That question hasn't yet been resolved yet. The land issue needs a thorough readdress, starting from 1486, as I said, followed by 1652, when our continent was invaded by Dutch. Today, the government is up in arms addressing the issue of inequalities, a problem that was created directly to cause untold abnormality to Africa. Thank you.
Please turn your mic off. All right, thank you so much.
Thanks from director.
No, please try and be as direct as you possibly can. I wouldn't want to be rude and cut you off, so that's just to everyone.
In that spirit, the former speaker did me a favor of critiquing everyone. I'll take it from there. Chair, the topic is the unresolved national question. National question, which refers to the oppression of one or other by a dominant imperial or colonial power. Why is it unresolved? You see, Chair, first thing we have to do is to weigh the national question with the national agenda of the nation. Because the problem, the mistake you'll make is to build a nation without a national agenda. That's because Marx makes it clear that for every struggle to be addressed, the nation must first address its own struggle. Now, if you have a nation without a national agenda, you're going to have a problem. Because a national question cannot be carried through if it is met with resistance within a nation. Now, in the person that you've quoted saying that in all forms of nation are different people who were born in that country, somehow we differ a bit. But Chair, let me get to the speakers. The speaker on the floor made an example of Zimbabwe and the working class party in itself. You see, Lenin speaks of something called an advanced detachment of the working class. He argues and said the lumpen proletariat cannot lead themselves. What made and gave hope to the workers everywhere in the country, where the song sang about Nelson Mandela when he was in exile, the song sang about those that were in prison. So that gave hope and power and energy to the workers to fight for themselves. So there are different, it is like an army. There are different departments pulling in the same direction. That's what leads a revolution. Two, on the reproduction of knowledge. This is important, Sisi, when you spoke on why South Africans don't watch their own movies. You see, institutions of learning, where we are supposed to reproduce knowledge, it's where the resistance of national question was first met. Because you will be surprised that half of the room, people who did history, they never did history about the Soviet Russia that you must go and watch, but they did more history about the Adolf Hitler. Because the reproduction of knowledge is centered so much that we must know less of the untold stories of Africa. Yeah. But we must know more of told stories that we do not need to know. Yeah. In trying to summarize it, I want to speak on the issue of constitutional rights. I would want to argue and say, indeed, our constitution is a liberal constitution. Because, by the way, if you are to argue and say our constitution protects our human right, I will then define what forms humanity. Because a property clause that defends people with property, it does not work for me who does not have property. And if I live under the poverty line of a nation that was saying we're building, I can then act to myself to be a human. Because part of national question speaks on self-actualization and self-determination. And if you live under the poverty, he who feeds you will tell you who you are. Then there will be no self-actualization. Actually, you'll be told. It's not a mistake that most of South Africans do not speak their language, but they speak the language of the oppressor more than they speak their own language. It's not a mistake, because they have no self-actualization, because the oppressor is the one feeding them. Lastly, Chair, in the issue of land question, you see, Chair, I have a lot of discussions raised. I raised one with the MEC of Agriculture. You see, we were speaking on the issue of nationalization of mines. The people must own their mines. You see, as I was speaking, Chair, I raised the question of the untampered with economy, the untampered with property. For an example, there's a new growing economy, the blue economy, which in the future is going to make money for this country. What are we doing as those who want to liberate the country economically? And what is the government doing in making sure that the economy is not tampered with? If you go to the rural areas of Bizan, there is a mine there, untampered with. They are going to wait for private ownership to take place, then we'll want to nationalize after private ownership has taken place. Because they are untampered with land properties that you are not touching. Instead, you are speaking on the one that you must not nationalize, leaving the ones that are not tampered with. Thank you, Chair.
Madam Chair, I greet you in Khoi deliberately. A former speaker has actually said what I'd like to say, that to resolve that question, we must start at the land question. And if you look into the land question, you must go to the original owners. Some people said some people must ask for forgiveness. And I think I won't point fingers, but the great man, Tata Madiba, once said, I have fought against white domination, and I'll fight against black domination. And if needs be, I'm prepared to die for that. You see, I think it's Ellen Zell made mention of people saying in 1951 about the different speakers and languages. And he didn't even mention the Kukugwa. That is the language of the Khoi. And we, our forebears, were totally diminished, taken out of this country of their birth. This weekend, somebody has former speaker, about the blue economy. This weekend we will celebrate in the sea, where some of the oldest fish nets in the world and in Africa is, showing that the Khoi that time already knew about the blue economy. So I'm saying, if we want to resolve this question, we must go to the original narrative of this country and of Africa, and we must talk. I think this is very good. And my question actually after this comment is to the panel and the book writers. Will we be able to change this? The people can resolve this. But to my opinion, if the governors don't want to have it happen, they've got the power. then we won't have it. Otherwise, we must overthrow it and get what we want. That is what I'm saying. Thank you, sir.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you, Program Director, and people who wrote the books and Malisa. I would like to draw the attention of the House to the preamble of the Constitution that says, we, the people of South Africa, recognize the injustice of the past, and we honor those that have fought and fight and work for democracy. And for that reason, we have accepted this Constitution as the supreme power for only one simple reason: to heal the division. Are we there? Are we interested to heal the divisions? How many premiers of our democracy got farmers? How many ministers got farmers of our democracy? How can it be? Let me maybe refer and say, how can you build a house without having side dimension? How can you build a house without a proper plan? You will never be able. Why, if you buy a site, you must have side dimensions. You must have someone who's going to draw the plan, who's going to do estimating costs for the plan. Do we have that as a nation? No, not. I'll give an example. When I talk about bringing people together, our government is not committed. There is no political will. Give you example, the rural versus the urban. If you go to rural, they've got startup packs to start their life. They're receiving cows, they're receiving tractors. What are we receiving from the rurals, from the urban side? Nothing. Act number 34 of 1996 is compelling government to find ways and means to restore our dignity that was stolen. Are they interested? No, not. Utada did mention of self-defense within our community so that we may not be vulnerable to criminals. Volume 8 of the TRC suggests to say, in all communities there must be self-defense or government must employ peace officers. Our government is not interested. Today we are saying Zuma must fall. Okay, he must fall. Yeah, he can fall anytime. Because we believe to say the Guptas are the ones who are appointing ministers. Sometimes to me it doesn't tie the current project of democracy. But in essence, I want to challenge everybody in this to say, we citizens, we are loyal to individuals and the constitution of our country is where the crisis is. Starting from the 80 members of the African National Congress, they are not loyal to their country, they are loyal to themselves. When Zuma said, I know you by names, who steals, and I'm hearing the frying pan, you ask yourself, why is Webster's Mantasha's wife in mines? Who benefited from the 500 million for toilets and Bushwa? Lindy Wesu, their sons and daughters, and we're still smiling. We come here debate, and as far as Nomnamis about it, I'm going to say, we come to do here talk shows. You know, please help me because I don't understand issues, I'm told. Where is the youth of 1976? If you look at stats, 6.5% of the Eastern Cape people, hardly, they don't have grade 7. How do you then restore a man's dignity that is not working? Don't have standard 5. There is no program, government to say we are bridging the gap between heaven and earth and say, okay, we'll take you to go and get a skills, an ETC, be a plumber, be a bricklayer, be an electricity, we'll employ you. There's no program. We've got a piece of legislation that doesn't tie the current democracy and challenges. We've got Older Persons Act. It doesn't assist old people. Recently, they nearly be victims. But what I'm saying is, I'm trying to concentrate and say, let us stand up and be counted. Enough is enough. I've said it in Pretoria. I've said Zuma's daughter was employed without even, a close requirement to be chief of staff. We've got so many highly qualified for positions. But for democratic sake, they're not getting employed. You will laugh at this. I read some, 3 years back, they said that there was 800,000 vacant posts for professionals. Versus there was 600,000 unemployed graduates. And I asked one of my colleagues, Your party says we are pro-poor people. Why? Because they are governing that sector. Why you don't employ them? But what I'm saying in essence, until we, as South Africans or Africans that are so much confused, stand up and say to government, enough is enough in numbers. We are going to come back here again and again and again what the law prescribed to say to the ANC. You are compelled, restore their dignity. I'm very old now, you want me to go back and work? I sacrificed my job. I was very early at the age of 17 years when I was arrested for struggle. I never joined the movement for this democracy of so many gangsters to a distance at our expense. I thank you, Chairman. Okay, before I'm finished. He says, 19, I feel let my people go. He stated categorically what went wrong in the ANC and is going to be wrong until we keep on voting them and removing them.
Thank you very much. My name is Nikita and I'm here. Our first, the question asked, what's the issue? I would say the issue is patriarchal, cisgender, heteronormative, masculine, free market, liberal economy, and South Africa operating in an island. That's the issue. The kind of system is systematic, and when we try to deal with it in a peace ad hoc way, it won't work. The system that is currently happening will always beat down the person who's marginalized, who's the minority, up until a time where we can try to recognize that the patriarchal system, that's cisgender, heteronormative, masculine, free market, liberal economy, will not work. And when you speak of globalization in terms of how has it assisted us, it has not. The workers that are employed there in the East, which slave, right, and are denied a living wage and they stay in these camps, they're not necessarily by globalization. The countries where jobs get taken and sent to third world countries that not assist and work will get unemployed. So when we speak of globalization as this huge, big hoo-ha trace, it has not assisted anyone. When people get left behind, it does not assist. Secondly, when our politicians continue to commit to empty rhetoric and want to be populist, that's where the problem starts. When you talk of broad churches, that includes everyone, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. No, you can never get a person that exploits you to free you. That can never happen. When you bring a person in with an agenda, broad church, what's that? You bring in a person to talk into a committee on an issue in terms of workers, where they have a stake, a vested interest. Where have you had that? It won't happen. You won't get freedom, you won't get liberalization, because then again, at the genesis of the ANC, it was a bunch of rich black people who were employed by Europe, the Methodist Church, the Dutch Church, who had land taken away from them. Because remember, there was a franchise in the Cape. They could vote, they could go to Parliament, they could go wherever. When land was taken by the 1913 Land Act, they found themselves among them who were black people. We look at the extension of black people, and they led the struggle, and now we have issues when we say want the land, they don't want the land, they want to have the franchise, they want to be the new white people, whilst they were black. So now we have issues of the Land Act looked at the ANC. No. And even those people, the EFF, whomever, who would sideline and talk to capital, to racists, and to talk to them and to try and have a coalition to defeat ANC, but they forget the true agenda is when our parents revolted, they wanted land, they wanted dignity, they wanted every South African to be able to fulfill their full capability and potential. They never wanted black industrialists who But in conclusion is this, we as South Africa must be honest in terms of what's our struggle, what do we want, and do not be blinded by empty loyalty. If we are honest to ourselves, you must know that you can never be in a struggle with a person not committed, that has a vested interest in the status quo in terms of exploitation. And also in terms of the identity of South Africa. I was reading from the book by Chinua Achebe, The Education of British Protected Child, that shows clearly how colonization came to Africa, how we were viewed, and how we are still, again, as black people, as those mothers, we are still viewed in terms of us wanting to subscribe to a certain notion of whiteness, of hate, of self-hate, right? And not even trying to revolutionize that. Because once you draw a child to hate themselves, an image of on screen, in terms of the language we're speaking now, what do you see on media, you never become a full, whole person. Those scars, the apartheid colonization, they are mental scars, they are emotional scars, and we have not healed. And this is why you see such issues still happening today.
Thank you so much. I'll just allow you all just a minute or two just to respond, and then I'll also allow Lucian and Dr. Gios, and then we'll see if we can have another round of questions. Okay.
Right. I've been listening very carefully to what has been said. And I think it illustrates to me the importance of revisiting the national question. A very evocative term that refers to the indignities and the racial injustice and dispossession. And I think that what we as the editors of the book and also the authors are trying to do is be a catalyst. I think that's the word that I would want to share with you. A catalyst in the sense that we're wanting to facilitate, to open, provide space to share and to think through how we could resolve and deal with these legacy. So that in a sense, that's our project in this. And I just wanted to make two quick other points. That I'm pleased that the comrade from who spoke behalf of Khoi people made a comment about language. You're quite right. In the quotation I was taking, it mentions many languages, but doesn't mention Khoi language. And I think it brings out the importance of being open to diversity of voices. I wanted, secondly, just to ask you to reflect for a moment. One of the authors in this book, Martin Legasik, passed away before the book was published. And Martin Legasik was, and he has a chapter in here, arguably the most talented scholar of my generation. And he was not only a scholar, he was also an activist. he joined the ANC as a young man, but he was expelled for his critique of the ANC, a critique that was rather similar to what Lucien was articulating in this. And I think I want to ask you just to stand for a moment in recognition of his memory, but also importantly to take a lesson from that. And the lesson is that in building this new nation, we're going to have differences of opinion. And one of the comrades said, you know, he disagreed with the idea of South Africa belonging to all who live in it. Now, that's a perfectly legitimate argument. But the way you deal with that is not to expel or silence the person, but to engage, to listen. And ultimately, it's through that listening that we learn from each other and build something quite unique on the southern tip of Africa. So could you stand for a moment in memory of Dr. Martin Lagasse? Thank you. Thank you. I'm done.
Sure. Thank you very much. Geez, I think a lot of things have been said and quite important. What stands out for me from listening to different voices here is that many of us agree on what it is that troubles us. Many of us agree on what afflicts our nation and what the problems are. We obviously do not agree on how they should be solved. And I think obviously part of that is because, as I said earlier, we are in different vantage points. And what concerns me is that what often comes out in South Africa, just in the discourse of South Africa, is that we are fighting obviously to have our voice heard, but we very seldom look at what it is that is of national interest rather than what is of self-interest. Somebody earlier, the gentleman sitting up there, spoke about, he brought it quite specifically to the issue of government as it is at the moment, and he spoke about how a lot of people who are leading in the ANC are looking not necessarily out for the country, but for themselves. You can debate that, and it's fine. I'm making an example of the fact that it is not just limited to how government deals with things. It is basically us as a nation, and although it might be a natural response to how we want things to be done, ultimately it doesn't take us anywhere. And ultimately, it leads us to a place, a very dark place that we actually don't want to go into. We don't have, I do not think, we don't have as yet a culture in South Africa where we're able to not only listen to each other, but we're able to see where it is that we can compromise. We are in the situation, at this moment, and I think there is obviously no one size fits all kind of solution to it. But are we able to have conversations that says, this is what we are willing to give up, this is what you are willing to give up, and are we able to actually, or is it a case of, we these ones win and these ones lose, it's straight up there and it's war, and that's basically where we're going. I think that is where we need to start actually having a conversation about what it is that each of us are willing to give up to make sure that we answer some of the questions that are asked in the national question, to make sure that we get to a point where we are able to make this thing work, this poison chalice that is our country, to actually make it work. Thank you. Karin, do you want to add?
Yeah, just very briefly. Both last night at our launch in Grahamstown and tonight here, one thing that I've been struck with is one is the concern that people are expressing, but the second is that a lot of young people are expressing these concerns, which I find very encouraging. Our book talks about the past, the foundational traditions, but the second part of it also talks about South Africa today. But really our future is with you guys, you know, with those who are studying and thinking now. And I find it very encouraging that you're engaging with a lot of very serious issues. But as our respondent has said, what we have to avoid, or what she hinted at, I'm sorry not to put words in your mouth, is we have to avoid fragmenting our struggles. You know, if we each are concerned about our own issues, some people are concerned about land, some people are concerned about what's taught in the universities, others about the Constitution, some about corruption, and so on and so on. The list is long. We separate ourselves from each other, and we sort of fall into that divide and rule kind of thing, which results in chaos, and then we can't achieve anything. So you've expressed your concerns, which is good, but now you have to think about how those concerns can come together, how we can work together, how we can look together for solutions. I don't have the answers, but I'm hoping that by us and you and other groupings working together, we can find some solutions and build that nation that we want, the kind of nation that we want, that doesn't benefit just a few, but benefits all of us.
I just want to thank everybody for the important points they've raised, people on the panel, the discussers, people who've attended this. I think it's very, very valuable, and this is exactly why rediscovering these hidden voices is important, because these are discussions and traditions that people have dealt with as well. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, I think, sometimes. I think we need to appreciate and engage with the powerful intellectual traditions of the working class and the left. And I think this is partly why I think this Hidden Voices project is so valuable. And that past is also still with us in other ways. If we want to look for an echo of workerism, we can see it with the new developments in the labour movement, the so-called NUMSA moment, the launch of the new federation, and NUMSA as a union positioning itself around slogans like fees must fall, like land expropriation without compensation. What links these two things together is the understanding, and it goes to one of the points that was raised over there, that the issue is a system. The issue isn't a particular party, it's not a particular individual, it's a system. And that system is something that has to be tackled. What the workers understood is the system that we're dealing with is capitalism, which was implanted here in a particular form through an imperial project. A capitalist society is built on the exploitation of the working class. This is not an accidental feature. It's not a feature that can be removed. The exploitation of the working class is capitalism. That is the point of capitalism. That is the core of capitalism. Therefore, what is the negation of a system based on the exploitation? That is for the working class itself to organize its power, its ability, its capacities, its identity, to recognize and appropriate its history, to build its capacity systematically and patiently, that it is able to shake that edifice of power, that it is able to shake that class that rules. Understanding that a past that was lost tragically through war and conflict can never be recovered. But what is possible is to reconstitute the mass of the nation, that is the working class, to create a future that is better than what we have now. To create a civilized society, because we're not there. South Africa is a wretched morass of racial tension, class conflict, misery, and miseration on all sides. How do we get out of it? That's really the question. And I'll just leave with a few points from the workers' movement. What they stressed was the importance of building movements based amongst the most exploited and oppressed strata. Movements that systematically built democratic structures that were able to force, win, hold, consolidate gains as a basis for future and further advance. A movement that understood the importance of strategically building bases of power, and then, once those are built, to move on from there. Not to deal in populism, not to deal in promises, but to deal in practice, a practice that is democratic and empowering. But the other question that I want to disclose on here is, for them the issue is, of course, you would need to redistribute wealth and power, but the question is to whom? In that quote from Moses Mayakiso that I gave, he said, well, to say we give land and wealth to the people, the question is, who is the people? Ramaphosa is part of the people. And back in the day when Tanzima was part of the people, the people have to be clearly defined. And their argument was, the majority of people is the working class. Therefore, the redistribution of wealth and power must go to the working class, not through an external agency, the state, not through a deferred power, that is elections, not through writing letters on Facebook, but through the conscious construction of a working class power, through organizing, through trade unions in particular, but not exclusively. Their point was that worker control and democracy, built in the here and now, lays the basis for a future based on worker control and democracy. That the immediate fights that we have now can form the basis of the bridgehead for a much more radical transformation of society. So a transformation isn't something that we simply declare in a manifesto. It's something that has to be built, organized for, conscientized for. Something that cannot be destroyed with a few leaders being removed. A system in which everyone is a leader, in which everyone is truly socially and economically equal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucien. I want to close with the following message. People have been talking here on the land question. I want to persuade us that we must look at the land question not in an emotional manner, which thinks about our past, but rather we should understand the land to be a very economic factor in our present lives. Here is what I would like just to suggest. That we want to resolve the land question this way. That we demand a new division of the land in this country. In terms of the entire population living on the land and living by the land. And when that rural revolution is established, it will therefore secure once and for all the lives of the people in the countryside. But not only that, it will at the same time serve to drive forward the security of food and foodstuffs for the population in the urban areas. Therefore, with the resolution of the land question, you are in fact allowing the nation to stand on both its feet, both in the country and in town. Secondly, which is my final point, I have stood here in defense of the basic slogan of this workshop, namely the building of a new nation. But we're not talking here about the old nations which were built during the glorious revolutions of Europe in the 18th century and 19th century. No, we're talking here about the new nations in the colonial world. The new nations in South Africa, in Ghana, in Zimbabwe, in Namibia, and elsewhere, in Brazil, because in these new nations basically will be strong when they become anti-capitalist. when they turn against the capitalist system and realize that the poverty of human beings is driven from behind by that system. Because when the nation is anti-capitalist, it indeed will have joined the general community of human nations, the general community of the world. Because by so doing, we will take the working classes of the world and unite them both in the urban areas and rural areas to build a great new world. Without that, the building of the nation is meaningless. Thank you very much, Comrade Chair.
Thank you so much. I'd also just like to alert you at this point that the conversation is taking place online. So for those of you that are on Twitter, Johnny Isaacs, the Herald's political reporter, has been tweeting ever since we started the event. So just use the hashtag national question if you'd like to join the conversation online. All right, then I just want to see if there is an appetite for a second round.
About the same people.
Okay, so Nikita, unfortunately, I'm going to exclude you because you had an opportunity. So unfortunately, I'm going to exclude you again. So I'm just going to take the final 2, 4, 5 hands. Those are the only hands, and that will be the final round. Also, due to time, I'm going to just request that you be as brief as you possibly can. All right? Can I see the hands again? 1. Isaac? Yes? Are you number 2? Sorry. Simply, am I noting? Oh, okay. Did you withdraw? Oh, okay. So 1, 2, and 3. All right.
Okay. Evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the panel. It's quite interesting to save South Africa. However, we've got the instability political system now at the very end in our country. The downgrading to junk status and the X that is hanging over our heads of Moody's. We must still hear from Moody's. What are they going to do about our future? And the political instability, the mere fact that the president of this country, the people has got no more respect for the president, says a lot about us. It says a lot to the outside world. It says a lot to investors. We want a radical transformation change. How can we achieve that if the atmosphere for creating jobs, for creating investment is not there? So in actual fact, we are telling the people lies about radical transformation change. That's just a myth. It won't happen. Firstly, the atmosphere must be created. Firstly, the question of the land must be handled in a very careful manner so that you don't chase away international investors which wants to invest in South Africa. Because by investment, the jobs come and so forth. I just wanted to make my point about that. I thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I had my own reservations before coming here about what this conversation was going to be about, and I still have my reservations since I have not read the book, so I cannot exactly critique anything in the book because I have not read it.
However, I will say that the points that have been mentioned within the books about different chapters that are covered in the book are actually quite crucial and quite important. However, I feel like, okay, they are sort of divorced from, they're not actually, but at the same time they are divorced from what it is that is the national question. I won't lie, I was very frustrated throughout this entire conversation. I was frustrated about, okay, the validity of everything that's been said. I cannot deny that, and I will continuously say everything that was mentioned here is quite valid. However, the last, I think the answer that was provided by, okay, I don't know his name, but I think Lucian, yes. I got an answer about what it is that we need to do from his last point about what it is what the problem is, how we can possibly do it, and we can strategize according to that. I thought the book was actually going to give strategy points about something, about exactly what he said. However, it still deals with these buzzwords of what gender is, of sexism, racism, and everything else. As I said, I do not deny the validity and the importance of them. However, I feel like there aren't, these books keep regurgitating works that have been written about so many times, and it's starting to get so frustrating, and we are not exactly dealing with the crux of the matter because we are not dealing with strategies. We are not strategizing, we are merely regurgitating thought processes of people that have existed and still do exist, and we just say that I think we do it to attach some sort of recognition to our names because we are trying to be relevant in whatever, and I really think instead now of talking about things about, yes, the theory behind it and the doctrines, I think now is the time to start writing about how to implement and to strategize about those doctrines. I just wanted to say that, just to conclude. Thank you.
Yeah, well, going about answering the national question, and I think we must be honest with ourselves that the majority poor people of our country are going to bed today without a roof above their heads. They are going to bed without a hot meal. And they are going to wake up with the same reality. And I do not want to be redundant and refer to history, but in all platforms like this, it must be said that the white man who came here with a gun and dispossessed us of our land must be the first or the genesis of answering the national question. And I think the 1994 breakthrough, understanding of course that it was a national, a negotiated settlement, is the reason why we continue, as Mrs. Makunga said, from 1930 we were discussing this thing, and sadly in 2017 we are still discussing the same question. We must revisit, therefore, I argue, the 1992-1993 sunset clauses of those laws, the property relations, and the codification of Section 25 with further entrenches and enlarges the difference and the distance between the rich and the poor. So if we do not become honest with ourselves and try to theorize the practical reality, the sad practical reality of the majority poor of this country, we are not going to answer the national question. I thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's an essential question that is being asked. And very important. And thank you for your work. Without the contributions and investigations, we won't be able to explore these topics, in such depth. Because one of the moments in South Africa when the national question was asked was at the time of the National Development Plan. The national question was asked there again. And it looked at an envisioning process an enlivening process, a citizen's approach. And we failed only to act on that intrinsically, because a lot of the questions that we've been asking were asked at that point in time, and we failed to explore them maybe deep enough at that time. And it was premised on the global financial crisis. The global financial crisis brought everything into sharp perspective and contrast. The global financial crisis basically said that there is no total system. And with a lack of a total system, the descension into chaos is imminent. Unless you start working together. Unless you start reshaping your divides. Unless you start putting behind you your differences and start shaping this country in the vision that was created all those years ago. From the workers' movements, from the women's marches. Unless you start doing that, you are going to go into the abyss. And this is, and also the historiographical problems that have come with it. There was deep anthropopaleontology work that was being done. And our universities, as our speaker rightfully said, was caught in the mix of this whole sea of change that was occurring around us. And we do have the answers. We do have the mechanisms. We do have the knowledge transfer projects to be able to enliven it. So I would encourage all of us to continue to contribute to such asking of a question, because we can beneficiate knowledge from inside South Africa and have external investment, and we can have internal investment because there's been a lot of asset stripping. That's not only of land, but of organizations, of knowledge systems, of human capital. And so we have to beneficiate knowledge, and we have to beneficiate humanity, and we have to create a new discourse of humanology.
Thank you so much. So, Karin and Slovis, I'm just going to do like 2 minutes of closing statements. Thank you.
Look, I just wanted to comment as the director of the Hidden Voices project and say that for us, the book that we produced was just the first step to a conversation of trying to recover hidden voices, and as the last speaker's spoken about the universities, to bring them into the university. That's a central, we'll be taking voices that were outside, ideas that were developed outside the universities into the university, because this is where knowledge is legitimated, is created, and where it can be transformed and made to work for the people. So that's, so if you like, stage one. I think the questions raised by the comrade about strategies, I think that's, we need to go back, talk to our colleagues, but I think that is the next step when you start to identify how to overcome this racialized inequality in a systematic and coherent way. I think that for me is the next step. Thank you.
Yeah, just to say very briefly that that conversations like this have to carry on. I think one of the comrades said earlier in the first round of questions that we learn a lot about European history and not so much about African history. We're trying to talk more about African history. And I think this issue, this notion of the beneficiation of knowledge is something that we can work with and continue. So keep on talking, keep on sharing ideas. It's important.
Just briefly, I think 2 points for me. The one was, and with all due respect, somebody's, I think it was used to mention that we shouldn't be emotional when we talk about, for example, issues of land. There's no way we cannot be emotional when we talk about land. It goes to the very core of our heart. It goes to the very core of who we are. It goes to the very core of what we're trying to be and what had happened to us. And I think what is important, we cannot say that, we're human, so we cannot say that we must kill emotion and kind of try and be rational. What is important, though, is for us to, as humans, to be responsible in what we do and know when we are in moments of history and know that, throughout our emotion, our fights, and our everything that we do, we ultimately have a goal that we would want to achieve. The problem that we have, obviously, is that we're not necessarily agreeing on what that goal is. And I think the sooner we try to do that, perhaps we'll be able to move forward. The second point I want to make is that somebody much earlier mentioned that we are, 2017 is a watershed moment. I believe that it is. But so was 2012, so was many other years before that. We cannot miss the moment in history. I do think that we have an opportunity again as a nation to decide what happens from here on. A lot of things are going to happen and change this year. Somebody was saying, every week there's some sort of big political intervention that happens, and that's true. But how do we react to it? And how do we take it and basically make something quite meaningful and significant of the moment that we're in? I think that is what we actually need to decide individually as well as collectively. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Just a reminder that the conversation is continuing online, and it will continue online. All right. Also, another thing, please also be aware that the book is available at the CANRAD Resource Center, so feel free to pop by and to borrow the book for your own interrogative purposes. All right. I'm just going to allow Alan just a minute to make an announcement before we close.
Just a comment about water. My brother over there, the Khoikhoi brother, had mentioned about this project, the Way of Water. Now, I want to find out, is this an open event, or before I speak about it publicly, is it an open event on Saturday or not? Can somebody just help me? It is open. Okay, then I can speak openly about it. At the Cape Receive on Saturday morning, 8 o'clock for 8:30. There's going to be a process of reconnection, I would say, in terms of history and heritage. And you are very welcome, all of you in the house, if you'd like to come along and be part of this this process of connecting. You may have heard about the university's marine campus and economy, and there are people working around this, and it will be a very, very interesting process to be part of. So you are welcome. 8:30 Cape Receive. So as we're speaking about water, I also had cause to think, Eddie, about the Israel and Palestine issue. one nation or two nations, and the issue of water. Because you may know that, of course, that there are about 1,500 prisoners that are on hunger strike at the moment, and there will be a request for a national day of fasting that will happen from 6 p.m. on the 14th of May to 6 p.m. on the 15th of May, where you are being asked to just drink some water. The people who are in prison there are only drinking water, and they're taking some salt at the moment with the water. So those are my comments, and it's for us to feel part of the solidarity movement in the world, not only in the country but in the world.
Just in addition to the book being available at the Resource Center, it's also on sale. Outside Poverty's bookstore is selling the book. Alternatively, you're welcome to visit the bookstore in Walmart. All right, that's it from my side. Thank you very much. I'd like to call up Professor Chetty, who's a professor in development, professor in development studies, to do the vote of thanks. Yeah.
Good evening. I know it's late, so I'm not going to abuse my microphone and make comments, although I've got plenty to say, as you know. Let me just say firstly thanks to the Herald and to Mr. Makunga for partnering with us in this initiative. And as usual, keeping the debate going, keeping things lively, critical. We appreciate your partnership. And also, thank you very much to CANRAD and the CANRAD team, Alan, Salwabo and others. CANRAD plays a role in this university, which those of you who visitors don't know, of providing the space, and the space for critical thought, engagement, dialogue, however you like to see it. And it's really critical that we do that, and that we have the space to do it. And I thought you might like to remember Rosa Luxemburg, who said, freedom is always the freedom of the dissident, the freedom to think differently. So it sounds quite a liberal thing, but we must protect that space. It's our space, and we use it as in the university, and we invite everybody here from the community, from worker movements and so on, to come and join us here. And lastly, of course, thanks to Eddie, Webster, Karin, Pampallis, Comrade MP Yose, and Lucien van der Watt, our workerist comrade here, for your input. And thank you all for the contributors to the book, and to our students and community members and people who can contribute to this debate. You are always welcome, and your critical input is always appreciated. Thanks.